You're listening to the Art Said podcast, season 2, episode number 18, Improving Your Powers of Observation. Welcome to the Art Said podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts and education, hosted by educators and artists Shauna Longo and Edric DeBose. Hey Edric, how's it going today?
I'm good. Lunch was great.
Excellent. We are back. Today, we thought we'd we'd like to be inspired with what our topic's going to be out of what we get out of other conversations that you guys hear in this podcast. And so we thought today we'd focus on the power of observation, and not only from a few different angles, because observation can kind of hit a couple of different points within the arts and a couple of different kinds of observation. Agreed?
Right. But the point also was to use observation in your classroom, observation of your own methods, and try to have a larger awareness of what the dynamics are in the room in terms of who's there, what the clientele is, what you're going over, what the topics are, and how it might or might not be received.
Absolutely. So I was reminded, I got an email the other day from the Institute for Arts Integration, STEAM, and there is a strategy that Susan Riley, I saw her do in a workshop once, and then Edric and I have used it, called The Power of the Penny. And so what that is you ask people in the room to give them a piece of paper, pen or pencil, and have them draw a penny. They're not allowed to pull one out of their pocket. They're not allowed to grab one from their handbag. Just draw it. And it's amazing how many times we've looked at pennies in our lifetime, and then you go to sit down and draw it, and you're like, what are the details of it? Right. And it proves that point of what, the need for close observation and intentional observation. Because most people, it's funny, and then you have everybody share, and everybody gets a good laugh out of if we take everybody's drawings, we might be able to put them together and make a real penny. Right. And then you show them the penny, and they go, oh yeah, oh, I forgot about that. Oh, I never noticed that. And right. So it just kind of brings out and gets people on the same page of thinking how do we really make observations, and what do we make observations of? And so we thought we'd start with kind of that little workshop. And if you're someone that leads workshops, use that one. If you're ever going to conversation about observation or noticing things, it's a really great little quick strategy. It takes 2 minutes, not even. I think I give people 30 seconds to draw that penny. Ask kids. They really probably don't see money as much as we old folks have.
Mm-hmm. And typically in my art classes, what I do, and if you're an art teacher, you know this, we do blind contour drawings, which means that you look at the paper. You don't look at the paper, rather. You look at whatever it is you're drawing, and you try to draw it without looking at the paper. And what it forces you to notice all these details. It forces you to see these subtle changes, and then you're really looking. And so there's a kind of a difference between looking and seeing.
Well, it also is. There's also observation. It's using the different senses, right? When someone can't see, their hearing becomes more astute, and things like that. I think that's a piece of this. I'm the type of person that if I'm reading something, I need quiet. I want to be able to totally focus. Whereas there's other people who can have TV on the background, and they need to be listening to music while they're reading and all these other things, whereas I don't function that way. So I think it's also a self-reflection of what you need to really do a close observation, or to really make note and understanding yourself and how that, and then you have to also then, if you're doing this with students, you have to understand them.
Right, because students, again, are just as different as you are as an individual.
Right.
So they have different ways of paying attention, or not. Some are more easily distracted than others, as we all know. So one of the things I took was, so I was thinking about observation. And I was thinking about what do you learn from the arts about observation? Typically with the visual arts, we talk about the 4-step process of critique. It's been around since the 1940s, and it has to do with first you observe, and then you analyze, and then you interpret, and then you explain, right? So those 4 steps are, and I thought, as I was thinking about this, what was interesting for me is I think when you think about the 4 buckets of the art standards, they kind of fit in there.
Absolutely.
So when you're observing details, you're in a mode of creation. You're in a mode of creativity because you're really looking at what's going on. You're thinking about what you're seeing. You're maybe throwing some different ideas around, like, well, this could be that, this could be that. You're making, again, just taking notes. When you're analyzing, then that's when you're really producing things, right? So when you're working with the elements or the principles of either art or music, art elements, the color, form, blah, 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 timbre with music, time. That's when you're actually producing, and then you have to interpret. So interpreting is really like responding, right? So that other third bucket of the art standards, and then to justify your perspective or offer an opinion. That's when you're really making the connections between these two different things. So
Absolutely.
That's one of the ways of looking at observation and having observation become a formal process. It's kind of that 4-step process of critique.
Well, and also I think it's important to think about it through the lens of the National Core Art Standards. How does observation fit in within the arts in our classrooms, and how could we look at it through that lens of the standards?
So just to go to left field a little bit, because that's where I like to live, to talk about observation in the arts. So one of my favorite artists is a guy named Yves Klein. Yves Klein is probably one of the early conceptualists. And what the conceptualists are, these are artists who think in terms of the idea is more important than the medium. So a conceptualist can be working with film, they can be working with photography, it can be a painting, it can be a poem, it can be spoken, it can be anything, but because it's really about the idea behind it. So Yves Klein in 1958, he had a piece called The Void, and it was an empty gallery. There was nothing
Wow.
in the gallery. And here's the great thing about it.
That will spark conversation, by the way.
Which is the whole point. So they publicized it, and 3,000 people came to the opening. Can you imagine? So it's like, and then those 3,000 people had to go talk to at least 3,000 other people. Like, oh, you went to the gallery, really?
So what did they publicize? That it was called Le Void, like the void, and then that was it. But they had no idea what they were coming to see.
Well, I mean, Yves Klein is an established artist. He's well known. Okay. He has a body of work. That people had a sense of who they were coming to see and what the work possibly could be. But the idea of
nobody expected that.
Well, the idea of presenting an empty gallery as the work of art. So in that situation, this is again translating from the French, but the title of it was Zones of Immaterial Pictorial Sensibility. So the idea of looking at a picture and what goes on in the process of looking at something, to take that as the subject of what the experience is, right? And so it's really about the experience of what happens to you when you're in a space where there's nothing to look at. You become extremely self-reflective. You have to think about, what am I doing here? What are my expectations? What are my anticipations? The other thing he would often do is he would present ideas. It would be a painting, but there are no pictures in the painting. It would be a book, but there are no words in the book. It'd be music, but there was no sound. So you take away the things that you're typically expecting to see, and then you have to fall back. It throws you back on your expectations.
It's going to make people uncomfortable. And then you got to think about, like, how does this make me feel? And what do I understand about it? It's that, like, feelings translating to an understanding.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, John Cage did this with music, right? His 4 minutes, 33 seconds, 4:33. He composed that in 1952. So by the way, before Klein did The Void.
Yes.
So I wonder if,
I would bet he knew.
I would bet there's a connection there. Yeah. I would bet. So Cage intended 4:33 to be experimental. He wanted to test the audience's attitude to silence and prove that any auditory experience may constitute music. Seeing the absolute silence can exist. Right. And I would say he's right. I mean, there's that whole thing where, like, if you're having a conversation, there's that, like, lull every 8 minutes or something they say, and then things pick back up. It's that, like, natural, but people don't like silence. It's uncomfortable.
Yes.
And the same with, if I walked in a gallery expecting art and saw nothing, it would cause pause. Like, I think I would stop breathing for a moment, and I'd really have to, like, wait, what? But then I think it would force me to notice the other people in the room. And I think that's the point of it. Like, that art would then change depending on who was there, because the walls were blank. And so what is the art?
But it's also, exactly. What is the art? So what is it you expecting to see? Because you have to deal with your own expectations. So just real quick, artist is Ed Reinhardt. So Ed Reinhardt was an abstract expressionist. He did these black paintings, and they were, and part of his whole thing was you couldn't reproduce them, so it wouldn't make a, you couldn't put them in a magazine. This was in the 50s, right?
Okay.
I've seen some of these paintings, and the thing is, they're geometric, they're squares and rectangles, but you have to stand there, you have to wait, you have to, and if you stand there and wait for like about 2 or 3 minutes, then you start to see these real subtle differences, because he would mix black and red, black and green, black and purple, but it took a while. You had to stand there, and it was really about testing your powers of observation. Then you noticed the brushwork and how subtle it was. There's how clean it was, and how much time it took. And then you saw these, and then it was about glazes. It wasn't just one simple color. It was one color glazed on top, So again, these are works that are kind of pushing you to really think about what it is you're seeing, and how do you reframe that, and what were the expectations that you brought to the work.
Yeah, I had never heard of Ed Reinhardt's pieces. I actually just Googled it quick while we were conversing. And I mean, the Smithsonian, MoMA, National Gallery of Art, like New York Times writing about it, like they're unbelievable. And I don't even think a picture can do it justice, because a photograph is not gonna, you're not going to see that detail you would see in person. But it's interesting to see how people tried to photograph it and see the different angles they took them at,
right,
of the same painting to try to give you that. But that's one of those, like, you got to see it in real life. That's really cool.
Yeah, so you have to go there, you have to experience it. But again, all these things are really about the powers of observation, and really pushing you to think about what it is you're seeing, what it is you're looking at, and then especially what expectations, what's the context that you typically think of. Because again, in education, we have a lot of context that we make a lot of assumptions about what teaching is, about what education is, about how you're supposed to go about it. And sometimes it's important to examine and to rethink what those things are. So,
well, I also will say that when you're thinking about observation, I also think that, some people, it's that like teacher driven versus student driven classroom, right? And, giving more to the students, you're increasing their power of observation, right? In a music class, instead of me, let's say I'm teaching a choir class and I'm conducting the piece and I'm behind the piano, and we stop and I immediately start telling them what was wrong and what they need to do to fix it, is a much less teachable moment than me stopping and saying, okay, what did you hear? And like observation isn't just with sight, it can be with other senses, right? Our ears or touch. And so I think that that's important and going to kind of transition us to the next part of our conversation about observation, is that we have to also not only do self-reflection, but having our kids do more observation and share those observations with us, because that's how you're going to make more connections and have them kind of own that learning and really connect to it.
Right. What I typically like to do in my classes, I like to let the kids struggle.
Yeah.
I don't tell them exactly what it is. I'm like, well, yeah. And you ask them again, what do you think? We'll try it, give it a shot, see what happens. That's really, where the learning really takes place. I agree. So, real quick quote to go on to when you start talking about methods of teaching. One of my favorite quotes, Einstein, right? So, creativity is seeing what others see and thinking what no one else ever thought. The thing I love about that is he doesn't say, see what other people see and then make something no one's seen before. He says, see what other people see and think something different.
Yeah.
It's a different. So creativity for me then is it's about observation. It's really about the thinking part of it. The production part, the making part comes later. It's really about, how are you thinking about what's here? And it could seem like it's obvious, especially if you're operating from your experiences and your expectations and your history, but like, you know what? There's probably a different possibility.
Well, and I think that's why people struggle with when they rolled out the National Core Art Standards, because they thought of creating as the act of creating.
Yes.
But creating is really the observation, the coming up with the ideas, the being creative. Doing it is in presenting, producing that section, right?
Right. So
performing. Sorry, that was the third. I was waiting. I was like, there's another P. Presenting, performing, producing.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, so asking the question, I think the point is to ask the question: what is it I'm seeing, and what is it that I'm missing? So
Yep.
one of my favorite things because I spoke about this last summer is the Coke can color illusion. Folks, Google it. Just Google it. And what it is, you look at it, it's an image of what you see is a Coke can. It looks like it's red. Your brain will tell you you're looking at red. If you zoom in, there's no red in the picture.
That's crazy. It's
What's
like that. There was a dress. Wasn't there like a big thing that went through social media about the dress? What color is the dress?
It's either blue and black or white and gold. Yes.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And I've seen images where you take a swatch of that particular dress, and
Yeah.
depending on the background you put it behind, it looks really different. It either looks white or gold or black, and then you can actually see you can literally side by side see the two different things. And then the thing about that is your brain is making assumptions with that particular photograph about how light or dark it is, what the lighting circumstance is that make, and that's part of why people either think it's again blue and black or white and
Yeah.
and gold. So context is everything.
Absolutely.
So, but it's really, I think for me, it's the thing I want to get to is it's really about these expectations, because again, a Coke can, it's red, right? Coke cans are red. So, but like folks, I promise you, it's worth it. Google it. The Coke can color illusion.
But that's our expectation versus reality. And our expectations can skew our observation. And that's really where, like, as teachers, we use our observations to create inclusive learning opportunities through differentiation. And sometimes we can skew
Right.
our observations by our own unintentional, bias.
Yes. So the question is, what are the experiences that your expectations are based on?
Right.
And that's part of what self-reflection really is. Like so you and I are very different people. We come from very different backgrounds. And
We do.
And then, so, growing up different places, different circumstances, you develop different expectations.
Yeah.
So I was also a TED Talk recently was great. There's a psychiatrist. She came out. She talked about this, and the very first quick thing she asked at a TED Talk when she came out. As soon as she came out, she said, "How many people want to win the lottery?" And of course, a lot of people raise their
Okay.
hand.
Yeah.
And
Who
then
doesn't want to win the lottery?
And then she said, "How many of you bought a lottery ticket?" And she said, "The reason you didn't buy the ticket, though, is because you didn't expect to win."
Right. She's right.
So behavior is driven by expectations, not by necessarily what you say you want.
Well, and that's why I think people get frustrated because when expectations aren't met, right?
Yes.
And that's why many educators get frustrated when their expectations for a class or for students or for their job, right, within a school aren't met. It can be very exhausting.
And the hard question to ask is, what are my expectations based on?
Right.
What's the narrative I was given?
Uh-huh.
You know,
Or what narrative did I create?
Yes.
Because that happens too. That's that self-reflection that we need as a part of observation is understanding, did I create this? Is this a me problem or them problem? And I
Right.
think it's very hard sometimes to have that real conversation with yourself and know what you can and can't control.
And I think one of the difficulties there is when you realize it's a me problem.
Yeah.
Is feeling, oh, well, you're blaming me. You're telling me I'm wrong about what I'm doing. Which is why I really appreciate Julian Gomez when he says that, because he works with a variety of different schools and institutions along the lines of diversity, equity, inclusion, and he said, you can't police bias because then you wind up making people feel defensive, right? And he said you have to come at it from a place of self-reflection, right? You need a willingness to be able to be honest with yourself and to honestly look at the situation. And if you can't do that, then again, people are going to be resistant. And I think all of us have seen. I've seen a bazillion talks. You're in a nice room, it's well lit, you got air conditioning, and and you're watching these people, and somebody says, "Well, I don't understand how you could possibly think of blah, blah, blah." Well, and you're watching these people argue, and they're not getting anywhere because everybody's defending their territory.
Yes.
Right. So that defensiveness is really going to prevent.
We find that a lot in schools. I'll say it out loud. I mean, Edric, right. We know we can think of a million examples of this that we are not going to get into in this podcast, but where people get very defensive. It's like, hey, it's you can't get defensive.
Well, and there's one more point I want to make before we finish up with this. So, I think in order to be self-reflective, you have to be able to feel like you're safe. You can't operate from fear or defensiveness or judgment.
Right.
And a great story I heard, there was again, like I watched too many TED Talks, but it was a psychologist, neurologist, and he said that basically, he thought about a glass of water. He said, if I have a glass of water and I put dirt in the water, right? Put dirt in the water, he said, no amount of sugar, right? No amount of sweetener is going to you have to take the dirt out of the water. He said, but the
Right.
problem is, in order for you to get the dirt out, you have to let the glass sit still. You have to let it sit, and then the dirt will flow to the bottom, and now you can actually see what's going on. And until you can see it, so you have to be safe in a seat. So he's making the point that you have to sit still, and it's hard for people to sit still because usually we're moving away from this towards that, defending this, defending that. So even when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's about the defensiveness. It's not about sitting still to wait to see, well, what's actually taking place here. What's actually being defended? What's actually getting talked about? Who's this really for? And I think asking those kinds of questions, you have to have, you need to be in a kind of very relaxed state,
Yeah.
in order to see how things filter out.
Well, and if I remember correctly, Jed Derryberry brought that up. He brought up about creating those safe spaces for students and that students have to feel safe. But I'm going to flip that and say educators also have to feel safe.
Yes.
It's not just, and administrators need to feel safe. Like everyone should have the ability and be given the opportunity to feel safe in schools, in life, really. Let's be real. Let's make that broad.
Yeah, but that's really the work. And there's no one simple single answer for that.
No, there's not. And I'm not trying to minimize it but I'm saying we need to do better to make that safe space. We need to observe our students. We need to understand them. We need to know what they're bringing. We need to understand ourselves, what we're bringing to the room. And then how does that all mix together to create that, to try to create a safe environment.
So just to circle back to the artists, to John Cage,
Yes.
and to Eve Klein, and to Ed Reinhardt, again, so these artists are pushing you to look at the context that you operate in, the
Right.
narratives that you bring to the situation. What are the stories you're already telling yourself? And what is it that has to be looked at? And who is this really for? So, I think you have to sit with those questions a long time. And that's really where something new gets created. That's where something worthwhile actually gets said.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, one of the most difficult hurdles is to believe that a change is possible and you can make it happen, right? How can I consistently become more observant in life, in work? So we'll leave everybody with that. How's that?
That's all we got, folks.
That's what we got today. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Until next time, my friends.